Part 1. The Descent. Orpheus and Eurydice were married on a warm spring morning when the world seemed full of promise. He was the greatest musician in Greece, a son of the muse Calliope, and was gifted with a voice and skill on the lyre that was said to make the earth itself weep. She was a nymph, beautiful and gentle, who had fallen in love with his music before she ever saw his face. When they wed, even the gods sent their blessings. It should have been the beginning of a long and happy life together. Instead, it lasted for less than a day. That afternoon, as Eurydice walked through a meadow with her companions, celebrating her new marriage with dances and songs, she stepped near a snake hidden in the tall grass. It struck her ankle, and by the time her companions carried her back to Orpheus, the venom had already taken hold, her skin now pale and cold. She died in his arms as the sun was setting on their wedding day, her last words a whisper of his name. Orpheus's grief shattered the world around him. When he played his lyre to console himself, the music was so sorrowful that trees wept sap and rivers slowed in their courses. He wandered for days, refusing to eat or sleep, unable to accept that Eurydice, the love of his life, was truly gone. Other men might have resigned themselves to the loss. After some time had passed, they might have built a tomb, made offerings to the gods, and eventually moved on with their lives. But Orpheus was not other men. He made a decision that bordered on madness. He would journey to the underworld itself and bring Eurydice back to the realm of the living. Everyone told him it was impossible. The dead did not return. That was the fundamental law of existence, respected even by Zeus, the king of the gods. Heroes could descend to the underworld during their journeys, could consult the dead or retrieve objects, but they could never bring a soul back to life. Death was final. Death was permanent. Orpheus, however, did not care. Taking only his lyre, the instrument that had won Eurydice's affections, he began his journey to the underworld. If the immortals could be moved by his music, perhaps Hades could be charmed too. And so he travelled to the southern edge of Greece, to a place called Cape Tenarum, where the land fell away into rocky cliffs and dark caves. The locals spoke of it in whispers. This was one of the gates to the underworld, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin. Few dared approach it, but Orpheus, driven by love, walked straight into the cave's mouth and descended without hesitation. The path led down into darkness. The air grew colder with each step, and the sounds of the living world, of birds, wind, and distant waves, faded behind him. Orpheus kept one hand on the cave wall to guide himself, the other clutching his lyre. The darkness was absolute. There was no light, no sense of how far down he had travelled, only the endless spiral of darkness and cold. Then he heard it, the sound of rushing water. The passage opened into a vast cavern, and Orpheus found himself standing on the shore of a river unlike any in the mortal world. The water was black, not the clear darkness of deep water, but an absolute, lightless black that seemed to absorb what little illumination existed. A blanket of thick mist rose from its surface, obscuring the far shore. This was the river Styx. Every man in Greece knew its name, learning of it from stories told since childhood. It was the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, the threshold that all souls must cross. The shore was crowded with spirits. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, stood or sat or wandered aimlessly along the black sand. They reached toward the water with translucent hands, crying out, begging for passage across the black river that never seemed to come. These were souls who had died without a proper burial, whose bodies had been left to rot in ditches or on battlefields, or whose families had been too poor to place the ferryman's payment in their mouths. Without that single coin, the obol, that bought passage across the Styx, They were trapped here, condemned to wait on these shores for 100 years before the ferryman Charon took pity on them. Orpheus felt their desperation as he passed through them. He was alive. He did not belong here, yet he could walk freely whilst they remained trapped. On the shore ahead, barely visible through the mist and the press of waiting souls, a figure stood on a small boat. Charon was ancient beyond reckoning. His face was little more than skin stretched over bone, his eyes hollow pits that sunk into his skull. His body was draped in dark rags that might once have been a ferryman's cloak, but had long since rotted to tatters. He stood motionless in his boat, a long pole in his skeletal hands, watching Orpheus approach with the patience of a being that had tended these waters since the world began. "You do not belong here," Charon said, his voice is low, yet dry and empty. "The living do not cross the Styx." "But I must cross," Orpheus said. "My wife, she who is dearest to me, is on the other side. I have come to bring her back." "Many have wanted to bring back the dead," Charon said, his tone as flat and unchanging as it had been for millennia. "None have succeeded. The Styx is a boundary that works in one direction only. Souls cross on my boat, but they do not return." "You must take me across," Orpheus pleaded. "Please, I will give you whatever payment you ask." Charon turned his gaunt face toward him. "The dead pay with a coin placed under their tongue at burial. It is the price of passage. But you," he paused, "you have no coin, and even if you did, I do not ferry the living." Desperate to cross, and with no other means to persuade the ferryman, Orpheus drew the only weapon he possessed, his lyre. He unslung the instrument from his shoulder, its polished wood smooth beneath his fingers, and began to play. The music that poured from his instrument was unlike anything that had ever been heard in the underworld. It spoke of love and loss, of sunlight on spring mornings, of laughter and warmth, and all the beautiful things that existed in the world above. It spoke of Eurydice, of her smile and the brief joy they had shared together. The notes hung in the cold air, bringing warmth to where only shadow had dwelt. Around him, the lost souls waiting on the shore stopped their aimless wandering and turned towards him. A few of the spirits, so faded they were barely visible, seemed almost to smile, as if remembering what joy had felt like when they were alive. As Orpheus played, the ferryman tilted his head slightly, as if hearing something he had long forgotten. The music washed over the dark shore, and for a brief moment the endless grey of the underworld seemed less absolute. When the last note died away, Charon set his pole against the riverbank. The boat scraped forward through the black water until it touched the shore at Orpheus's feet. "I have ferried souls for longer than mortals have kept count of time," Charon said. "Never in all those ages has anyone brought music to this shore. Step into the boat, living man. I will take you across, but know this. The living do not belong in the realm of death. What you seek to do has never been done. The Lord Hades does not give up his subjects." Charon pushed off from the shore with his long pole, and the black water of the Styx closed around them as the vessel glided into the darkness. Orpheus was not alone on the crossing. Several shades sat on the wooden benches, their forms barely more substantial than smoke. Their eyes stared at nothing. They did not speak, did not move, already beginning the slow fade that awaited all souls in the underworld. Orpheus looked at them and felt cold dread settle in his chest. Would Eurydice be like this by the time he found her? Would she even remember him? One of the shades turned its head toward him, a man who had perhaps died only hours before. Unlike the others, some awareness still lingered in his face. He noticed Orpheus staring at the dark water and spoke, his voice barely more than a whisper. "The Styx," the shade said. "It circles the underworld 9 times, marking the boundary between the living and the dead. The gods swear their most binding oaths upon its waters. To break such an oath brings suffering, even for the immortals." "Are there other rivers?" Orpheus asked, grateful for any knowledge of this realm. The shade nodded, pointing a translucent finger at a number of waterways branching off into the darkness. "There is the Acheron, the river of woe. Many souls enter through its waters. And that is Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. Souls drink from it to forget their mortal lives, to ease the pain of what they have lost. Some drink willingly, others are made to drink before." The shade trailed off, uncertain. "Before what?" Orpheus asked. "Before rebirth, some say, though that is a mystery even the dead do not fully understand." In the distance, a deep orange glow pierced through the mist. "Pyriphlegethon," the shade whispered, "the river of fire. It flows down to the deepest regions where the wicked are punished, and next to it lies Cocytus, the river of lamentation. You can hear it sometimes, filled with the wailing of those who suffer." Orpheus shuddered, and, as if in response, a distant sound drifted across the water, a chorus of screams and moans. The vessel eventually reached the far shore, scraping against the muddy bank. Charon gestured with his pole for Orpheus to disembark. The ferryman said nothing more, already turning back toward the opposite shore where more souls would be waiting. His duty was eternal, and the music had earned Orpheus this one crossing, nothing more. Orpheus stepped onto the bank and turned to face what lay ahead. The shore of the Styx gave way to a broad plain, shrouded in perpetual twilight. There was no sun here, no moon, no stars, just a dim grey light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The landscape was colourless, all blacks and greys, and utterly silent, except for the shuffle of countless shades making their way inland. And there, blocking the path forward, was Cerberus. The hound of Hades was enormous, its 3 heads rising twice the height of a man, each head turned independently, watching the arriving souls with eyes that burned a dull red. Rows of teeth lined its jaws, while its claws left deep grooves in the stone with every step. At its back, a serpent's tail lashed through the air, and smaller snakes writhed through its dark fur. Cerberus had guarded these gates since the beginning of the underworld, and his purpose was simple: to prevent the living from entering, and, more importantly, to prevent the dead from leaving. He was the ultimate guardian, ensuring that every soul remained where it belonged. Anyone who tried to pass without permission would find themselves torn apart by 3 sets of jaws, their remains scattered across the floor, and their souls lost for eternity. The shades walked past the beast without fear. They were entering, moving deeper into the realm of the dead, as they were meant to, and Cerberus paid them no attention. But when Orpheus approached, all 3 heads swiveled to fix on him. The hound knew what stood before it, a living man, breathing warm with life. A low growl rumbled from 3 throats, and the creature tensed, preparing to strike. Orpheus did not run. He had faced death itself by coming here. A guardian, no matter how terrible, would not turn him back now. Instead, he lifted his lyre and began to play. The music was different this time, not warm and joyous, but gentle. A lullaby, the kind a mother might sing to comfort a frightened child. It spoke of peace and rest, of safety and warmth, and the sweet pleasures of sleep. The notes drifted across the grey landscape, wrapping around Cerberus like a soft blanket. The growling stopped. The massive heads tilted, listening. Then something impossible happened. The three-headed monster that guarded the gates of death lay down. The red glow faded from all of its eyes. One head yawned, showing all its terrible teeth. Another lowered itself to rest onto enormous paws. The third kept watching Orpheus with a gaze more curious than threatening, until it too began to lower. Orpheus walked forward slowly, still playing, until he stood directly before the beast. He reached out carefully and placed a hand on one of the great heads, the fur coarse and warm. At his touch, Cerberus made a sound close to a whimper, like a dog having a pleasant dream. "Good boy," Orpheus whispered calmly. "Sleep? I mean you no harm." With Cerberus asleep, Orpheus walked past the guardian, leaving the gates behind as he entered the land of the dead. The path led deeper, and Orpheus followed it into the grey fields where all souls eventually dwelt. The landscape was barren, no trees, no grass, or any sign of life or growth. Just empty earth, stretching endlessly in all directions under that sourceless grey light. These were the Asphodel Meadows, the place where most of the dead spent eternity. It was neither punishment nor reward, just existence. The souls here were not tortured or blessed. They simply were, fading slowly over centuries until nothing remained but the faintest echo of the person they had once been. Orpheus looked at them and felt despair creeping into his heart. Somewhere in this vast grey expanse was Eurydice. He had to find her. He had come too far to fail now. Walking among them, he searched every face he could make out, calling Eurydice's name into the silence. But no one answered. The shades continued their endless wandering, and the meadows stretched on without end. How long he searched, he could not say, for time felt different here, but eventually, through the mist, he saw an ominous structure, tall and dark, rising from the flat grey landscape ahead. Part 2. The Judges of the Dead. Orpheus continued down the path until he reached a vast plaza. Souls were gathering there, forming lines that stretched so far back that he could not see their end. At the far end of the plaza, 3 thrones sat upon a raised platform, and on those thrones sat 3 figures, the Judges of the Dead. Orpheus had heard of them, as all Greeks had: Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, 3 men who had been kings in life, renowned for their wisdom and justice. When they died, the gods had appointed them to this task, weighing the deeds of every soul that entered the underworld to determine where each would spend eternity. Minos sat in the centre, the eldest and most famous of the 3. He had been king of Crete, the man who had kept the Minotaur imprisoned in the labyrinth beneath his palace. So just had he been in life that even Zeus had respected his judgments, though his own household had been touched by tragedy. His spirit retained the bearing of kingship, upright and stern, his gaze unwavering despite death. He had a golden staff, the symbol of his authority, and his word was final in any dispute. To his right sat Rhadamanthus, who had ruled the Cyclades and established laws across the Aegean islands. In death he judged the souls from Asia and all lands that lay to the east. He was quieter than Minos, more contemplative, but no less thorough in his assessments. Where Minos pronounced judgment with swift authority, Rhadamanthus weighed every detail before delivering his verdict. To Minos's left was Iacchus, who had been king of Aegina, known for his piety and his fairness. He judged the souls from Europe and the western lands. He kept the records and maintained the lists of the dead, ensuring that no soul was overlooked or misjudged. His role was as much administrative as judicial, but his voice carried equal weight when the three deliberated. Orpheus watched as souls approached the platform one by one. Each stood before the judges, and, through means Orpheus could not quite perceive, the three kings examined them. They did not ask questions or demand testimony. They simply looked upon each soul, and within moments knew everything they needed to know. Every deed from birth to death lay open before them. Every kindness shown, every cruelty committed, the entire arc of a life compressed into moments. Orpheus saw a woman step forward, her spirit still bearing the features she had worn in life, a trader's wife perhaps, or a craftsman's mother. The judges regarded her in silence for a moment. Then Minos spoke. "The asphodel meadows," he declared. Guards, themselves spirits, but bound to service in the underworld, gestured for the woman to follow a path that led away to the left, into the grey expanse that stretched endlessly beyond the plaza. She went without protest, without emotion, already beginning to fade into the listless existence that awaited her. Another soul approached, a young man who had died in battle. His shade still bore the wound that had killed him, a spear thrust through the chest. The judges studied him with more care. "He fought with honour," Rhadamanthus said, "defended his city, showed courage in the face of certain death." "But he was no hero," Iacchus added, consulting his records. "No great deeds, no exceptional virtue. A good man, a brave soldier, but—" "The asphodel meadows," Minos concluded. The same verdict, the same path to the left. The young warrior followed it without complaint, disappearing into the grey like the woman before him. More souls came forward, more judgments were rendered, and Orpheus began to understand. Most of the dead went to the asphodel meadows, not as punishment, but simply because they had been ordinary. They had not been exceptionally virtuous or exceptionally wicked. They had lived, and now they were dead, and eternity would be spent in that grey, purposeless wandering he had witnessed on the path. Then a different verdict came. A man stepped forward, and the moment the judges looked at him, their expressions darkened with disgust. Even in death, there was something unnerving about him. "A kinslayer," Minos said, his voice cold with judgment. "Murdered his own brother for an inheritance. Then fled to a temple and swore false oaths to Artemis," Rhadamanthus added. "Defiled her sanctuary with lies." "The gods themselves demand his punishment," Iacchus said, making a mark in his records that looked different from all the others. Finally he spoke the judgment. "Tartarus!" The man's spirit began to scream before the guards even touched him, understanding the eternity of punishment that awaited. The guards seized and dragged him, kicking and screaming, towards the downward path. "I did not mean to," he wailed. "He provoked me. The goddess will forgive me." But the judges had already turned away. The gods did not forgive kinslaying. The gods did not forgive those who defiled their temples. The man's screams grew fainter as he was pulled into the depths, down towards the red glow of the river Pyriphlegethon. Orpheus felt a cold dread settle over him as he imagined what awaited the kinslayer. To be sent to Tartarus required more than simple cruelty or selfishness. It required crimes that violated the most sacred laws, the spilling of family blood, the desecration of holy places, lies sworn in the names of gods. The line continued. Dozens more souls approached and were sent to the asphodel meadows. A thief, a prince, a woman who had spent her days caring for the sick, all of them went to the grey. Then, after what felt like hundreds of judgments, a new verdict came, one Orpheus had not yet heard. A warrior approached, and even as a spirit he moved with confidence. His form was more solid than the others, his features clearer. The judges straightened slightly when they saw him, their expressions turning from indifference to ones of respect. "Vestor, son of Laertes," Minos said, then paused, studying the warrior's shade more carefully. "No, grandson of Hermes. The blood shows clearly." "That explains the courage," Rhadamanthus observed. "Divine lineage carries weight, even in death. He fought at Troy, died defending the ships when the Trojans nearly burned the fleet. His deeds were worthy regardless," Iacchus added, "but the god-blood ensures his place." "Elysium," Minos pronounced. A murmur ran through the watching spirits. The closest thing to a reaction Orpheus had heard from the dead. The warrior's spirit seemed to brighten slightly, to gain substance. Guards approached him with what looked like deference and gestured toward the path that led away to the right. Orpheus could see it more clearly now, the path to the Elysian fields, where the grey light gave way to something warmer, where colour existed and the sound of joy and laughter could be heard. Paradise for those who had earned it through glory, through deeds so great they transcended ordinary mortality. But it was rare. For every soul sent to Elysium, hundreds, perhaps thousands, went to the meadows, and for every one sent to Tartarus, tens of thousands went to the grey. Orpheus watched the plaza for what could have been hours or could have been days. Time had no meaning here. The lines never shortened. The souls simply kept coming, an endless procession from the world above. Finally, when he could bear it no more, Orpheus approached the platform himself, unsure whether he should wait in line or simply pass by. He was not dead. He had not come to be judged. But the judges noticed him immediately, all three heads turning towards this living man in their realm. "Orpheus," Minos said, without hesitation, "we know why you have come." "You seek to retrieve Eurydice," Rhadamanthus added, "a soul who belongs here, who has been judged and sorted according to our laws." "We cannot help you," Iacchus said. "The dead do not return to life. That is not within our authority to grant." Orpheus had known this would be their answer. "I seek only permission to pass," he said, "to present my case before Hades himself. Will you allow it?" The three judges conferred in whispers. Then Minos spoke again. "You are alive. You do not belong in this realm. By rights we should turn you back." He paused. "But you have already passed Charon and Cerberus. Your music has earned you that much. We will not stop you from continuing." "Thank you," Orpheus said. Rhadamanthus gestured to one of the spirits standing near the platform, not a newly dead soul, but one who had been in the underworld for a very long time. The spirit approached, more substantial than most, still bearing the features of the old man he had been in life. "This is Linos," Rhadamanthus said. He served the temples in life, and now he serves here, guiding those few souls who have business in the deeper regions. He will show you the path to the palace. The route passes near Tartarus. You will see things that mortals were not meant to witness. I warn you now, do not stray from the path, and do not linger. The Lord Hades does not appreciate visitors wandering his realm." Lynos bowed slightly to Orpheus, his expression neutral. "Follow me, living one. The path leads downward." Orpheus thanked him and stepped past the platform. The grey light began to fade almost immediately as they descended. The air grew heavier, and from somewhere far below, screams echoed up through the darkness. Part 3. Tartarus. The path continued downward, twisting deeper into the underworld. The grey light disappeared entirely, replaced by a dull red glow that pulsed from the depths below. The air became thick and hot, harder to draw into his lungs, though Orpheus suspected breathing was more habit than necessity here. "The path to the throne passes near Tartarus," Lynos said, "the deepest pit of the underworld. When Zeus overthrew his father Cronus and the Titans who ruled before the Olympians, he cast them down into this pit, sealing them behind bronze walls and adamantine gates. Now mortal souls who have committed unforgivable crimes share their prison." "I saw someone dragged down here earlier," Orpheus remarked. "The kinslayer." "Yes," Lynos affirmed. "He will suffer for eternity, or until the gods decide otherwise. But the gods rarely change their minds about such things." The guide glanced back at Orpheus. "What you are about to see, living one, are the punishments reserved for those who committed crimes so terrible that even death does not end their suffering. These are those who defied the gods themselves. Take care not to look too long, for such sights can break even the strongest of minds." The path spiraled deeper. The heat grew intense, pressing against Orpheus's skin. The screams were constant now, layering upon themselves until individual voices merged into a single chorus of agony. The red glow ahead pulsed brighter with each turn, and with it came the smell of sulphur and burning flesh. Then the narrow path opened suddenly onto a precipice, and Tartarus lay spread before him. It was an abyss, a chasm so vast that its bottom disappeared into darkness. The river Pyriphlegethon carved through the depths far below, its waters burning with actual flames, flowing like liquid fire and illuminating the scene in flickering red light. And in that light, Orpheus saw the damned. The first figure he noticed was a man pushing a boulder up a slope. He was bent over with the effort, his spirit straining against the massive stone as he forced it upward inch by painful inch. The slope was steep, the boulder enormous, but the man continued anyway, his arms shaking from the effort. But just as he reached the top, when he was only a few more feet from the summit, the boulder slipped from his grasp. It rolled backward, gaining speed, crashing down the slope to settle at the bottom exactly where it had started. The man stood at the top for a moment, his shoulders hunched, his chest heaving, staring down at the stone. Then, with a resigned look on his face, he began the slow and miserable walk back down to the bottom to start all over again. "That is Sisyphus," Lynos said quietly, "the king of Corinth, perhaps the cleverest mortal who ever lived, and the most arrogant because of it." "What did he do?" Orpheus asked, unable to look away from the terrible scene. "He cheated death. Not once, but twice." Linos paused, watching the man begin to push the boulder up the hill again. "The first time, when Thanatos, Death himself, came to claim him, Sisyphus was ready. He pretended ignorance, asking Thanatos how exactly mortal souls were meant to be bound for the journey to the underworld. Death, always proud of his work, brought out the chains he used to bind souls and began to explain. Sisyphus asked if he could see how they worked, and Thanatos, pleased that someone had finally shown interest in his work, was happy to oblige. However, the moment Death demonstrated by wrapping the chains around himself, Sisyphus seized him and bound the chains tight, locking him within." "He imprisoned Death?" Orpheus asked in amazement. Linus nodded. "For a considerable time. No one could die while Thanatos remained captive. Warriors were cut down in battle but rose again. The sick lingered in agony but could not pass. The natural order was broken. Ares, the god of war, grew furious. He came to Corinth himself, freed Thanatos, and dragged Sisyphus down to the underworld." "But you said twice," Orpheus asked, confused. "Surely he could not escape once brought down here." "Ah!" Linos exclaimed. "You would think so. But when Sisyphus arrived here, he had one more trick prepared. Before he died, he had instructed his wife not to perform the proper funeral rites. No burial, no offerings, nothing. When he stood before Persephone, queen of the dead, he complained that his wife had dishonored him, leaving his body to rot without ceremony. He begged to be allowed to return to the living world for just 3 days to scold her and ensure proper rites were performed. Persephone, kind as always, granted what appeared to be a reasonable request." "And he never came back," Orpheus said, understanding before he was told. "Exactly." Linos smiled, clearly happy to have someone to tell his stories to after centuries of servitude. "He lived for many more years in the mortal realm, laughing at the gods, boasting of how he had tricked both Death and the queen of the underworld. Finally, Hermes was sent to retrieve him personally. The messenger god dragged Sisyphus's soul down here and delivered him directly to Hades." Linos gestured to the slope. "The punishment was decided then. Sisyphus had spent his life trying to escape death, trying to climb above his mortal station through cleverness. Now he pushes a boulder up a slope for eternity. Every time he nears the summit, every time success seems within reach, the boulder rolls back down. He knows it will happen. He has known for centuries, but he must keep trying regardless." Orpheus felt pity as he saw the boulder roll down yet again. To know that your task would never end, that success was impossible, and yet to be compelled to keep trying, it was worse than any physical torture. "Come," Linos said. "There are others." They moved along the path, and Orpheus saw another figure. This one stood in a pool of water that reached his waist. Above him hung branches heavy with fruit, apples, pears, and figs, all ripe and perfect. Yet, despite the abundance of fruit hanging above him and the body of water below him, his body was skeletal, wasted away by starvation, and his lips were cracked and bleeding as if he had been parched for decades. Orpheus was confused until he saw the man reach up to the branches. As his fingers neared the fruit, just a hair's width from touching, the branches lifted higher, pulling just out of reach. He tried again, stretching as far as he could, but the fruit remained tantalizingly beyond his grasp. Then he bent to drink from the pool, but as his lips were about to touch the water's surface, the pool receded, draining away until he stood on dry ground. When he straightened, the water returned, filling the pool once more, always present, but never accessible. The man looked as if he would weep, but his body had no water to spare for tears. It was a sight so pitiable that Orpheus had to look away. "That is Tantalus," Lynos said, "the king of Lydia, a son of Zeus himself, which made his crime all the more unforgivable." "What did he do?" Orpheus asked. "He murdered his own son," Lynos replied, a look of disgust on his face. "Pelops was the boy's name. He butchered him, cooked his flesh, and served it to the gods at a feast. He wanted to know if the gods could truly see all things, testing if they could tell the difference between mortal meat and animal flesh. It was the worst offence imaginable, killing his own child and attempting to trick the gods into cannibalism." Orpheus looked at him in horror. Did they eat it?" Lynos nodded grimly. "Demeter, grieving after she had lost Persephone, took a bite before realizing. The others knew immediately what he had done. They were—" Lynos paused, searching for words. "The god's fury was absolute. They restored Pelops to life, but Tantalus, he stands there forever, with food and water always present but never in reach. He is eternally hungry, eternally thirsty, with relief perpetually denied. We call it tantalizing now, to be tormented by something just beyond reach. That word comes from his suffering." Orpheus watched as Tantalus tried once more to grab the fruit, the same desperate motion he had surely made 1,000,000 times by now, knowing it would fail, but unable to stop himself from trying. The word suffering seemed insufficient for what he endured. They continued walking, and Orpheus saw more figures in the pit below. 49 women, all working together, pouring water from jars into a massive vessel. But as quickly as they poured, the water leaked out through countless holes in the vessel's sides and bottom, splashing uselessly onto the ground below. The women worked tirelessly, filling their jars from a pool, pouring them into the vessel, and watching the water drain away. Over and over they repeated their task. The vessel could never be filled, yet they could never stop trying. "The Danaides," Lynos said before Orpheus could ask, "the daughters of Danaus, king of Argos." "What was their crime?" Orpheus murmured, wondering what offence could have cursed so many to this fate. "Murder," Lynos said. "On their wedding night, 49 of them killed their husbands while the men slept." Lynos gestured to the women below. "Their father had arranged marriages to the 50 sons of his brother, Aegyptus, but he feared his brother's sons would kill him and take his kingdom, so he gave each daughter a dagger and commanded them to slit their new husbands' throats. Only one daughter, Hypermnesta, refused, letting her husband live because he had shown her respect and kindness." "And the other 49 are punished for obeying their father?" Orpheus asked. "They are punished for murder," Lynos said simply. "The gods care little for mortal politics or family loyalty when sacred laws are broken. Marriage is sacred. Hospitality is sacred. They violated both, killing men who had been welcomed as husbands and guests. So they pour water endlessly, trying to fill what can never be filled, attempting to wash away blood that will never come clean. Their labor, like Sisyphus's, is eternal and futile." Orpheus watched them work for a moment longer before Linus gestured that they should continue. The path descended further still, deeper into Tartarus, where the heat grew more intense, the red glow of the pyrophlegathon brighter than ever. Then Orpheus heard screaming, different from the distant sounds of suffering that filled the pit. This was painful, agonized, the sound of a man in constant torment. He looked and saw what might have been the most horrific punishment yet. A figure was bound to a massive wheel. It spun constantly, wreathed in flames, and the man chained to it spun with it, his body burning and regenerating in an endless cycle of agony. "Ixion," Linus said with no pity in his voice, "king of the Lapiths. He committed 2 crimes that earned him this." "What could a man possibly do to deserve this?" Orpheus asked, both horrified and genuinely curious. "First," Linus began, "he murdered his father-in-law, pushed him into a pit of burning coals during what should have been a feast of reconciliation. He was the first mortal to spill kindred blood, and the gods shunned him for it. Only Zeus took pity, purifying him of the murder and even inviting him to dine on Olympus." Orpheus was shocked. "That sounds like mercy." "It was," Linus said in agreement, "and Ixion repaid that mercy with betrayal. He lusted after Hera, Zeus's wife and queen of the gods. He tried to seduce her at Zeus's own table. Zeus, realizing what Ixion intended, created a cloud in Hera's shape to test him. Ixion, of course, lay with the cloud, thinking it was the goddess herself, then boasted about his conquest." Orpheus felt anger rise within him. "He bragged about it? To Zeus's face?" Linus continued. "His arrogance was absolute." He gestured to the spinning wheel. "So Zeus bound him to that wheel, set it aflame, and sent it spinning forever. Ixion burns, but does not die. He spins, but cannot stop. He screams, but no one answers. That is what becomes of those who violate the sacred laws and lust after the gods." They walked further, and Orpheus was unsure how much more he could endure. These punishments, he knew with certainty, would haunt him for the rest of his life. As he continued to walk, the path finally began curving upwards, the screams growing more distant as he was led out of this terrible place. But as they began their ascent, Orpheus became aware of other presences in Tartarus, figures that moved through the pit with purpose, overseeing the punishments, ensuring they continued without interruption. They were women, or at least had been once, but now they were something else. Something terrible. Their skin was grey and withered, stretched tight over bone. On their head was not hair, but living snakes, writhing and hissing around their faces. Their eyes wept blood continuously, leaving red trails down their cheeks. They wore black robes that seemed to be made of shadows, and in their hands they carried studded whips, dripping with the blood of their victims. "The Furies," Orpheus whispered. "The Erinyes," Linus corrected, using their older name. "Born from the blood of Uranus, when Cronus castrated him and cast his severed parts into the sea. They are older than the Olympian gods, even Zeus himself. They enforce the most sacred laws, the murder of kin, the breaking of oaths, and the violation of hospitality. They pursued Orestes for killing his mother. They hounded the Danaids until they were imprisoned here. They are merciless, unstoppable, and they do not forgive." One of the Furies turned her head, and Orpheus felt her gaze fall upon him. her blood-weeping eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to run. She took a step toward the path where he stood. "Do not meet her eyes," Linus said urgently. "You have committed no crime that concerns them, but they do not appreciate the living walking in their domain. Move quickly." Orpheus tore his gaze away and hurried after Linus. Behind him he could hear the Fury's footsteps, the hissing of her snake hair, but she did not follow further. After a moment the sounds faded, and when Orpheus dared to glance back, she had returned to her post, watching over the damned with eternal vigilance. "They never rest," Linus said as they continued. "They never forget. If you committed kinslaying or broke a sacred oath, they would pursue you to the ends of the earth and beyond. Even the gods fear them, because they enforce laws older than Olympus itself." The path continued to ascend, and gradually the red glow of Tartarus faded behind them. The screams grew fainter. The air became less oppressive. They had passed through the realm of punishment and were moving towards something else, towards the center, towards Hades himself. "You have seen what awaits those who defy the gods," Linus said. "Remember that when you stand before Hades. He is not cruel, but he is absolute. The laws of death are not negotiable. What you ask for has never been granted. Perhaps seeing these punishments will help you understand why." Orpheus said nothing. His mind was full of images he knew would haunt him forever. Sisyphus and his boulder, Ixion burning on the wheel, these were the consequences of defying the natural order, of breaking the laws that governed existence. And he was about to ask Hades to do exactly that, to break the greatest law of all, the one that governed the dead. Part 4. Hades and Persephone. Despite the enormity of the task that lay ahead, Orpheus had come too far to turn back now. Somewhere in this realm was Eurydice, and his only hope of seeing her again lay ahead. The path led upward from the horrors of Tartarus, climbing back toward the grey plains. The red glow faded behind them, replaced by a different kind of light, cold and silver, like moonlight without a source. The air grew calm as they ascended, no longer heavy with heat and suffering. There was a stillness here, unlike anything in the world above, the quiet of a place where nothing lived and nothing would ever change. Linus gestured ahead, and Orpheus saw it rising from the grey landscape, the palace of Hades. It was built from black stone that absorbed light rather than reflected it. The walls rose to impossible heights, their tops disappearing into shadow above, with massive columns that flanked the entrance, each one carved from a single piece of obsidian. The gates stood open, revealing a courtyard beyond where torches burned with flames that gave no warmth. This was the heart of the underworld, the seat of power in the realm of the dead. Linus stopped at the entrance. "This is where I leave you," he said. "I guide souls to this point, but no further. What happens beyond these gates is between you and the Lord of the Dead." "Thank you," Orpheus said, bowing his head slightly, "for showing me the way." Linus smiled. "I hope your music proves as persuasive as it was with Charon and Cerberus. You will need every advantage." He paused, then lowered his voice to a whisper. "If I could offer you one last piece of advice, His queen, Persephone, knows what it is to be taken from the world above. Perhaps she will be more amenable to your request." Before Orpheus could ask what he meant, Linus had turned and began walking back down the path, his spirit fading into the distance. Orpheus stood alone before the palace, and despite fear building in his chest, he stepped forward. His goal was too close to give up now. The interior was vast and cold. Columns of black marble rose to support a ceiling so high it could not be seen. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting nothing despite its mirror-like surface. More of those cold torches lined the walls, their flames casting everything in shades of blue and silver. The palace felt both grand and empty, a place built to impress, but devoid of warmth or life. Spirits moved through the halls, servants of the underworld, going about tasks Orpheus could not fathom. They paid him no attention, drifting past as if he were not there. Perhaps to them he was not there either, for the living did not belong in this place. At the far end of the great hall, raised on a dais of black stone, stood 2 thrones. They were carved from a single piece of dark rock. No cushions softened them, no decorations adorned them. They were seats of authority, not comfort, and upon them sat the rulers of the dead. Hades occupied the larger throne on the right. He was tall and imposing, his frame wrapped in robes the colour of midnight. His black beard was streaked with grey, his face pale as marble. A crown of dark iron rested upon his head, plain and unadorned, yet no one who saw it could doubt his power. His eyes were the most striking thing about him, not cruel or kind, but implacable, eyes that had witnessed countless souls pass through his realm, judging and sorting the dead for as long as death had existed. He was not a monster. He took no pleasure in passing judgment or overseeing the eternal suffering of those in Tartarus, but the natural order required death to have a lord, punishment to have an enforcer, and Hades fulfilled that role without complaint. Beside him sat his queen, Persephone, as different from him as spring from winter. Where he was stern and unyielding, she was contemplative and caring. Where he commanded respect through authority, there was something about her that made people give it freely. She wore robes of deep purple, her dark hair bound with a crown of asphodel flowers, the grey blooms that carpeted the meadows of the dead. Her skin was pale, and her eyes held depths that spoke of someone who understood both joy and suffering.
"Orpheus," Hades said.
His voice was deep and resonant, filling the vast hall.
"We have been expecting you. Word travels quickly in my realm. The living man who charmed Chiron and put Cerberus to sleep with his music. You have impressed my subjects. Few mortals could claim as much."
Orpheus bowed deeply, his lyre clutched in his hands. "Lord Hades, Queen Persephone, I have come to ask—"
"We know what you have come to ask," Hades interrupted. "You seek Eurydice, your wife. You want her returned to life."
"Yes, my lord," Orpheus said hopefully.
"The answer is no," Hades said with finality. "The dead do not return to life. This is the fundamental law of existence, and I do not make exceptions."
Silence followed. Orpheus felt the weight of that single word, no, crushing down upon him. "My lord, please," he said, his voice breaking, "let me at least make my case."
"There is no case to be made," Hades said, though not unkindly. "I understand you loved her. I understand you grieve. But love and grief do not change the laws of death. Every mortal who has ever lived has lost someone. Every person in my realm has left someone behind who mourned them. If I granted your request, I would have to grant it for everyone. The boundary between life and death would dissolve. The natural order would collapse."
Persephone leaned forward slightly in her throne, her dark eyes fixed on Orpheus. "Why did you come, truly?" she asked. Her voice was gentler than her husband's, but no less serious. "Did you believe we would simply hand her back to you? Did you think the laws of death meant nothing?"
"I thought," Orpheus struggled to find words, "I thought that if I could reach you, if I could show you what we had, what we lost, that you might understand, that maybe just once love could be enough." "Love is never enough," Hades said. "Love does not stop death. It simply makes the loss more painful." "Then what is the point?" Orpheus said, and he heard anger creeping into his voice, despite knowing he stood before a god. "What is the point of loving anyone if it all ends here? If everyone we care about becomes one of those lost spirits wandering grey fields and slowly losing every piece of themselves until there is nothing left? If this," he gestured at the cold palace, the empty halls, "is all that waits, why love at all?" Silence fell in the throne room. Hades regarded Orpheus with an unreadable expression, and for a moment the musician thought he had gone too far. Then Persephone spoke. "Because the alternative is to live without love," she said quietly, "and that is worse than any death." She looked at her husband, and something passed between them, so subtle that Orpheus almost missed it. "I know something of being taken from the world I loved, of leaving behind the ones who loved me above all else." Orpheus remembered what Linos had hinted at, and suddenly he wanted to know, "What happened to you, my lady? How did you become Queen of the Dead?" Hades' expression darkened, but Persephone raised a hand to forestall whatever he might have said. "I will tell you," she said, "because my story is one of loss as well, and perhaps you will understand that I know what you carry." She settled back in her throne, her eyes distant, remembering a long time ago. "I was not always Persephone. Once I was simply Kori, the maiden. I was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and I lived in eternal spring. My days were spent in meadows, picking flowers and dancing with nymphs, knowing nothing of darkness or death or sorrow. My mother loved me more than anything in creation, and I loved the world she had made for me." Her voice grew calmer. "One day, I was in a meadow on the island of Sicily, gathering narcissus blooms with my companions. I saw a flower more beautiful than any I had encountered, so beautiful that it seemed to call to me. But when I reached for it, the earth opened beneath my feet." Orpheus found himself drawn into her story, the throne room fading around him as he imagined the scene she painted. "Hades emerged from that chasm," Persephone continued, glancing at her husband. "He seized me and pulled me down before I could scream. My companions rushed over to grab my arms, but it was too late. The earth closed above us, and I was brought here, to this realm of shadows. Everything I had known, sunlight, flowers, my mother's laugh, was gone." Orpheus turned to Hades. "Why? Why did you take her?" The king of the dead spoke for the first time since the story began. "Because Zeus, my brother and Persephone's father, decreed it. He decided I should have a queen and that Kori was suitable. I did not ask her permission. I did not attempt to win her favour. I took her, as gods have always done."
"My mother did not know," Persephone said. "For 9 days and nights she searched the world, calling my name and finding no answer. When she finally learned what had happened, that I had been taken to the underworld with Zeus's permission, her grief turned to rage. She locked herself away for an entire year, and without the goddess of harvest, the world itself began to wither away. Crops died in the fields, trees bore no fruit, famine spread across the earth, and the mortals began to starve, an eternal cold settling in.
"Zeus was forced to intervene,"
Hades added, his tone suggesting he still resented this.
"He sent Hermes to retrieve Persephone and return her to her mother before all of humanity perished."
"But there was a complication," Persephone said, and now there was an edge to her voice, an acknowledgment of fate's cruelty. "Before I left, Hades offered me pomegranate seeds, 6 of them. I ate them willingly, not understanding what it meant." "The food of the underworld," Orpheus said, remembering old stories. "Eating it binds you here forever." "Yes," Persephone said, with a gentle sigh. "So a compromise was reached. 6 months of each year I spent here, as Queen of the Dead. My mother grieves my absence, and nothing grows. The trees lose their leaves, and the world freezes over. The other 6 months I return to the surface, and Demeter's joy causes nature to bloom across the earth once again." A faint smile touched her lips, though whether from happiness or sorrow Orpheus could not tell. "You mortals experience this as the cycle of seasons, autumn and winter when I descend, spring and summer when I return." She looked at Orpheus directly now. "So you see, I understand what it is to be torn from someone you love. Even now my mother grieves for me and I for her, and I have learned to exist between 2 worlds, maiden and queen, spring and shadow. I am both, and I am neither." "Do you—" Orpheus hesitated, glancing downwards as he spoke. "Do you love him, after everything?" Persephone was quiet for a long moment. "I have grown to understand him, to respect the burden he carries. He is stern but not cruel. He enforces laws he did not create, and he has remained faithful to me over the years, which is more than can be said for most of the gods." She glanced at Hades, and something softened in her expression. "It is not the love I might have chosen, but it is the love I have." Hades looked uncomfortable with this discussion of emotion, but he did not contradict his wife. "Why are you telling me this?" Orpheus asked. "Because," Persephone said, "you need to understand that love takes many forms, and sometimes it means accepting what cannot be changed." She paused. "But sometimes, very rarely, the unchangeable can bend, just a little." Persephone then turned and looked directly at her husband, her voice soft and mellow. "I would like to hear his music, the music that charmed the ferryman, that lulled fearsome Cerberus to sleep. Then we will decide." Hades contemplated the thought for a few agonizing moments. Finally, the Lord of the Dead nodded. "Play," he commanded, "and we will listen." Orpheus lifted his lyre, his heart racing. Everything he had been through had come down to this very moment. He had descended past monsters and witnessed the torments of the damned. He stood before the rulers of death itself, and all he had was his music, his love, and his grief. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft, almost tentative, as if testing whether sound could exist in this place of eternal silence. Then the melody grew, filling the throne room with something that had not been heard here during the countless centuries of its existence, the music of life, vibrant and warm, utterly foreign to this realm of shadows. Orpheus sang of the first time he saw Eurydice, how she had been dancing in a meadow, how her laughter carried on the wind, and how a part of him had known, even in those first moments, that she was the one he had been searching for all his life. Next, he sang of their wedding day, the flowers in her hair, the feeling of her hand in his, and the brief, fleeting moment when everything had been right with the world. Then the melody shifted to something darker. He sang of the snake, of the scream that had shattered his happiness forever. He sang of the emptiness that followed, how food had no taste, how sunlight brought no warmth, how the world itself seemed to have lost all colour and meaning. His voice broke as he sang of loving someone so completely that their absence carved a wound that would never heal. And finally he sang of what he had come to ask, for a chance to have one more sunrise with her beside him, to have a final embrace with the one he loved. When the last note faded, Orpheus slowly lowered his lyre. He felt emptied, as if he had poured everything he was into the music. His face was wet with tears, despite not realizing he was crying. The throne room was utterly silent. Then he heard a sound that seemed impossible in this place. The sound of weeping. Persephone's face was streaked with tears, which she made no attempt to hide. She understood. Every word he had sung, every note he had played, she had felt it all, because she knew what it was to lose the world you loved, to be separated from the person who mattered most. Even Hades looked changed by what he had just heard. No tears ran down his cheeks. Orpheus was not sure he was even capable of that, but his stern expression had softened, his gaze distant, as if he was remembering something from long ago. "No one has ever played music so beautiful in my halls," Hades said finally, his voice quiet. "No one has ever made my queen weep. No one has ever reminded me of what it means to feel." He looked at Persephone, and she looked back at him. No words were needed. They both understood what the answer would be. Hades turned back to the musician standing before him. "What you ask violates the fundamental law of existence. If I grant your request, I set a precedent that could unravel everything. However," Hades paused, and Orpheus felt his heart stop, "your music has moved even us. So I will make you an offer, a bargain. One chance and one chance only. Anything," Orpheus said immediately. "I will agree to anything." "Eurydice will follow you back to the world above," Hades stated. "She will walk behind you as you return through my realm, back past Cerberus and across the Styx, but you must not look at her, not once. Not until you both stand in the sunlight of the living world. If you turn, if you look back even for a moment and catch a glimpse of her before you're both fully in the light, she will return back to my realm forever." Orpheus felt ice in his veins. "I cannot see her, cannot confirm she is there."
"Those are the terms," Hades declared. "You must trust. You must have faith. You must walk forward without looking back, believing that she follows. This is not a journey you can make with certainty, only with hope."
Persephone leaned forward. "Orpheus, this is the only chance you will ever have. My husband does not bend. He does not make exceptions. He has given you more than you could possibly imagine. Do not waste it." The terms were cruel, designed to test him, to force him to choose between love and certainty, but they were also the only terms he had been given. "I accept," he said. "I will not look back." Hades nodded once, and guards disappeared into the shadows behind the thrones.
"Face the doorway, and do not move until I tell you."
Orpheus turned himself slowly, his back now facing to where Eurydice would be brought. He stared at the doorway ahead, forcing himself not to look back, even though every muscle in his body screamed to turn around. He waited for what felt like an eternity, until finally Hades spoke.
"She is there, behind you. Now walk through that doorway, and do not look back until you are both standing in the sunlight."
Orpheus stood and immediately called out to her. He strained to hear any sound, footsteps, breathing, anything, but there was only silence. "Eurydice?" he called out softly, but there was only silence. "Eurydice, it is me. I have come for you. Can you hear me?" Nothing. Not a word, not a sound. She was a spirit now. Maybe she was too faded to speak, or could not understand what was happening. Or perhaps she was not there at all, and this was some cruel test. He would never know. Not until they reached the surface. Orpheus took in a deep breath and then began walking. Hope now, the only thing driving him forward. Part 5. The Ascent. As Orpheus walked through the palace gates, the grey landscape of the underworld stretched out before him. However, the journey felt different now. When he had descended, he had been driven by determination, but now he walked with nothing but uncertainty, every step testing his resolve. It was not long before he descended into Tartarus again, the world turning red around him as he passed into its depths. He walked by Ixion on his burning wheel, and the Danaïdes endlessly filling the broken vessel. He saw Tantalus reach desperately for the fruit above his head, and Sisyphus release the boulder as he neared the summit. But the tortured spirits did not affect him as they had before. His mind was elsewhere, thinking only of the wife he hoped and prayed was truly behind him. What if she had stumbled? What if the path near Tartarus had frightened her and she had stopped, too afraid to continue? He was desperate for the answers he could not have, with his only choice to continue forward. Soon the red glow of Tartarus faded behind him. The path began to curve upward, leading back towards the upper regions of the underworld. It led past the platform where the judges sat. Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iacchus watched him pass, their expressions unreadable. Linus stood near the platform, the old spirit who had guided him down, Their eyes met briefly, and Orpheus searched his face desperately for some sign, a nod or a smile that could confirm that Eurydice was behind him. But Linos's expression remained neutral, giving nothing away. Orpheus felt anger flare within him, but it quickly subsided. It was likely that Linos feared punishment if he interfered with Hades's bargain, wanting to avoid anything that might add him to the ranks of tortured spirits in Tartarus below. As he passed back through the endless grey of the asphodel meadows, the doubt became crippling. Every moment of silence chipped away at his faith, the temptation to turn around growing with each step. "Eurydice," he whispered, unable to stop himself. "Are you still there? Please give me some sign, anything." Silence answered him, complete and absolute silence. Finally, after what could have been hours or days, the sound of rushing water reached his ears. The river Styx lay ahead, the journey nearly complete. Passing back through the underworld's massive gates, Orpheus found Cerberus lying where he had left him, the three-headed guardian lightly snoring as he passed. Finally, he saw Charon standing in his boat, exactly as before. "Orpheus, welcome back," he said. "Truth be told, I had not expected to see you again, but Lord Hades has commanded that I ferry you back across, and so I shall." Orpheus stepped into the boat carefully, positioning himself to face forward. Then Charon pushed off from the shore with his long pole, and the black waters of the Styx closed around them. The crossing felt endless. The boat was small, and he knew Eurydice would be right behind him, close enough to touch, the temptation to reach back almost too much to bear. When they finally reached the far shore, Charon spoke one last time. "The living world lies ahead, Orpheus. But remember, one glance backward, and she remains with me forever." Orpheus climbed out and began walking again, not much further now, just up this path, through the cave and back to the surface. Then he could turn and finally have certainty. Before long, the darkness began to lessen. He could see the walls of the cave now, able to make out details in the stone. The air changed, no longer so cold, and he could see the first rays of sunlight filtering into the cave. It was almost blinding after so long in the darkness below, but Orpheus kept pressing forward, desperate to reach the surface, to finally know. His heart was pounding, his breath came in gasps. He was almost there, just a bit further, just a few more steps. He reached the cave entrance and stopped. Ahead of him was sunlight, and it was more wonderful than he had remembered. It warmed his skin, it illuminated the world outside, with Orpheus sure he had never seen such vibrant colours in his entire life. The grass was a rich green, the sky a beautiful blue, the sounds of birds singing and leaves rustling filled the air. Orpheus stepped forward into the sun. He had done it. He had resisted every temptation, endured the doubt even as it threatened to crush him. Joy overwhelmed him. Against every rule of death he had succeeded. Eurydice was free, and they would have their life together, reclaiming all the years that had been stolen from them. He turned around, a smile on his face, ready to finally embrace his wife. And then he saw her, standing just behind him, more beautiful than he remembered. Relief flooded through him. Hades had been telling the truth after all. His faith had been rewarded. But Eurydice was not smiling. Her expression was one of horror. While he stood outside the cave, warm sunlight beating down on his back, Eurydice remained cast in shadow, still standing within the confines of the cave. One more step, and she would have been free, just one more step. But Orpheus had turned around too soon. "No," she whispered, and Orpheus felt his heart drop. "Orpheus, what have you done?" Eurydice! He called out, reaching for her desperately. Eurydice, I'm sorry. Please, do not leave me again. But she was already fading, being pulled back down into the darkness below. The rules had been broken, the condition violated. She belonged to Hades again, and there would be no second chance. I love you, she said, her voice growing fainter. I was there the whole time. I was following. You just had to wait a little longer. Just a few more steps. Eurydice! Orpheus cried out, lunging forward. He tried to grab her, to hold on to her fading form, but his hands passed through mist. She was already gone, pulled back into the realm of death, returned to the grey meadows from which she had briefly escaped. The cave mouth showed only darkness now. Orpheus stood alone in the sunlight, his hands still reaching for something that was no longer there. He fell to his knees at the cave mouth, and the lyre he had gripped so tightly during his journey slipped from his hands onto the grass. He had been so close to bringing her back, to achieving what no mortal had ever done. But he had lost it all in a single moment of joy. The sun continued to shine, and the birds continued to sing. The natural order had been preserved, but Orpheus would bear this truth for the rest of his days, that nothing, not music, not faith, not love itself, could truly conquer death. I've been David Rintoul for Deep Dive History. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye.